watching Co-op for Two. I'm Jesse. I'm here with Greg.
Thanks for having me on your channel.
And this is our review of Marvel United.
Yeah, so if you're new to the channel, we take our time with everything. And it's almost, since I'm Jesse, you can kind of lead this discussion. So I'm going to start off with saying, like, I think our little channel here is good for when, even after you bought it. It may be not the best for, are you going to buy it, since we tend to take our time, and I'm sure we will with this one. It's a very short game.
I love that idea, though. Can I just say how much I love that idea? When we started, we talked about the channel would be useful maybe for people who have no one to play these games with. They could watch it instead of playing. But I love the idea that our reviews and our long discussions would be good for, like, after you've played it. You still want to talk about it? Yeah, you still want to talk about it and hear people talk about it.
Yeah, so it is a very pretty light game, very short, but we're going to talk about it probably for longer than it would take for you to play a game, which is pretty light. So let's kind of address firstly, actually you said how I came to this game, but we kind of decided to play this game today because there's a Kickstarter that's live right now for a sort of sister game, which is X-Men, Marvel X-Men United, which the X-Men universe is, of course, a very large universe within the Marvel universe, but it's kind of a chunky, kind of like a lot of characters and stuff.
And both of us read X-Men growing up. We both that was our number one comic.
Life was being a nerdy little kid reading X-Men comics, almost exclusively X-Men. So, and of course, and we should say this too, like, this is of course all the characters, a lot of deep cuts in here and stuff, and not with this particular, but with the Kickstarter and stuff. But we're really gonna talk about the Kickstarter because, I do want to kind of just at least broach that subject, which is that, we recently did a review of Endangered, and I had kind of mentioned that I felt like this game is very much like a new, a modern board game. Because it really uses like this kind of bashing together lots of different things like deck building, lots of different mechanisms, deck building and like sort of like these rolling dice and occupying spaces. This game isn't really a modern board game in that sense, but it's a modern game in the marketing sense, because like this thing there's a whole Kickstarter element to this where like it's this whole you can't ignore it when you think about this game. So we're going to kind of go into that after we sort of cover the basics and talk about the game itself. But it is a pretty big topic.
I just want to add one more thing.
Absolutely.
As you've pointed out to me, it's not just that there's a Kickstarter for X-Men. It's now you've got an opportunity to get all the stuff in the first Kickstarter. So like, if you love this game, you have a couple of weeks to get all the stuff that
maybe not
you might not. But you might not be able to get otherwise.
Okay, so let's just talk about. We're going to talk about this game for a little bit first. So, firstly, we're going to do the theme art and components. So, we just said we're both big comic book fans, so it's nice to see like.
Well, I wouldn't call myself a big comic book fan, but I used to be.
Sure.
I used to be.
So, and of course, this game uses like sort of the look that you're used to in seeing on the MCU and the character selection and stuff.
Can I give my opinion on that yet?
Yeah.
Or you want to wait for that?
Go ahead, really
I don't like it.
You don't like the look of the character?
I don't like the baby style.
Oh, the chibi. Okay, well that's
everything
a whole
else
thing.
I like. Okay,
sure.
I thought that's what.
Yeah, so the sculpts and the minis and stuff are all in that chibi style, which is to have like, I guess I'll show the top now, which is to kind of have an exaggeratedly large head, and sort of very cartoonish. So the characters are very.
I mean,
cartoon.
They're cool. They're nice. They're nicely done. I love the one who's on the quarter, Ant-Man.
Yeah, that's the best one. He's standing on this quarter. Of course,
I'd rather have these be adults than babies. That's all I'm saying. Like, if it was my choice, I'd rather them be adults.
I would 100% agree with that. I think that's but I did kind of think this is kind of an extra thing. But like, at one time I was like, Crossmaster Arena is kind of an interesting game that got some buzz, but I don't really care about those characters. And so now every now I have like these Universal Monster chibis. And there's these guys and stuff, so I'm like, wouldn't that be kind of cool to reskin that? And you could use kind of these characters in it, but that's a completely other thing. But I mean, I think they look really cool. I think they look really great painted, but it's not something where like I agree. I would prefer them to me less cartoony. But I think it looks
I agree. It's
the
consistent.
Miniatures look great.
Looks nice. The miniatures look fantastic.
Yeah.
It's nice. They're different
also
color.
Strange, like you don't normally see this, but the art style is exactly what you see with the figure.
Yeah.
Which mostly like art in games versus the miniatures, like you can tell it's that character, but it doesn't look like they're the same, like done by the same person or whatever. But this looks like this piece of art came to life as that miniature.
And they're nice and big. Like you can know exactly who's who. They all look different.
And you could have done this with like little icons or whatever, but clearly like this gives you it's pleasurable to move them around the board and stuff like that, and you can kind of see. So, but I would also say, it's cool like thematically. I like that like, each of the characters sort of, so I should So basically you would play cards in a chain, like you would start with one and then play another one. You would play one and then do that action, and then your teammate would play a card, and then they would be able to use their action and your action. So Marvel United is kind of meaning that you're uniting together, and it's kind of cool like thematically because each of the characters sort of has their own deck, which is almost identical, but usually there's just 3 different cards in that deck that'll be specific to them. And it kind of makes sense, like Captain America has his leadership, so like when he'll give tokens to other characters, or the Hulk has like one where he moves and just smashes and he kills like everything in that square or whatever, so that's kind of neat. And then Black Widow is able to interrogate, so she looks at the top card of the villain deck to see what they're going to do, so she's sort of prepping and planning and doing some espionage. And even stuff like Captain Marvel can kind of shoot her photon blast to another location, which is cool. But also she has like this cool double move, and if you use that as like if Jesse used his double move as Captain Marvel, and then I can use that move, it kind of means like, well, Captain Marvel just came over and lifted me up and carried me and dropped me off in a place, and then I did a punch or something. So although it is of course very abstracted, you could see it's very strong in terms of like they're working together to do these actions, right? Like I'm not just punching, but you're sort of tossing me up. Or
from a bigger top-down perspective, let's just talk for a second about choose a villain to play against. There's 3 in the base set. They all have their different rules for how they behave.
So they're different scenarios, basically.
And then you put out 6 locations from a choice of 8. Each location might have a special ability once you clear it, and the villain has its own deck, which instructs it to move and then put out stuff.
Yeah, which is like either civilians that they've like scared away
that you have to rescue,
or criminals or convicts. And when we played the Ultron scenario, which I think you can watch on the channel, like he's putting out convicts, but in our minds we're thinking, okay, well, these are little Ultron drones, right, that you have to beat up. And then so each of them will have a thing that you'll have to do to kill them. Maybe might have special rules for it to kill them, and you have to kind of complete 2 of these 3 tasks in order to damage the villain and win. And this is rescuing civilian, defeating thugs, or clearing these threats. And when you clear the threats, you also get to use that ability of that location if you're there on the end of the turn.
And there's a very tight time clock because you have this small deck, and when the deck runs out, the game ends.
Yeah.
So there's.
Well, we'll talk about that more, I think. But so like just looking at the components and stuff, so we've kind of talked about the art, the chibi style. You're not a fan of, but I think it looks cool, and the minis are.
It does look good.
They're fantastic minis, by the way. I mean, they look great. But it is crazy because now the price point of this game is very low
for the base set.
But you want to talk about the card quality and the.
Well, the card quality was fine to me. This is a little upsetting.
Well, we joked around that like you could win. You're allowed to win if you're the villain was here and you could like sort of spring them, like seesaw style.
So the card quality didn't bother me. Token quality was fine too. Yeah, it's these things.
They're warped.
That could have been nice, thicker cardboard. They would have solved this whole
warped.
Thing.
These are warped. These are warped. They're all very.
It would not have killed them to make those out of thicker cardboard.
I mean, the price point is a very like mass markety. Go to Target, spend $30 on a game. Like that's the quality, but it definitely would be. I like spend an extra $5 or $10 even and get something.
Yeah, I mean they clearly spent money on the minis.
Yeah, I mean that's where all the money's going. But these locations are cool though. They give you a special power like. The helicarrier I thought was a cool one because it's a thematic location for the Marvel universe, and also like at the end of the turn you can move to any location, so you sort of jump on the helicarrier and it moves you and you can jump down or whatever, and so that's kind of cool. So they all have a little bit of a thematic thing: Avengers Tower, Shield headquarters, Avengers Mansion, Central Park, New York Police headquarters. So they all have like kind of a thematic Stark Labs. So thematic, and also they have like a thematic type thing you could do. Like Stark Labs, you can swap a card from your hand with one in the storyline, so like you can replay a card, and it's sort of like he's developed that tech for you to do that. So I think that's kind of neat, you know. So thematically, do you think this game do you feel like you're kind of playing the heroes and stuff?
Yeah. I mean, not hugely.
Sure.
It's a simplified game. It is clearly targeted at a mass market sort of intro gamer stuff, but but yes, the decks, as you said, are not that different.
Sure.
But those few special powers of each deck do make the deck feel like it plays differently. Some of the characters are support characters. They're giving tokens to someone else. The Hulk is a real puncher and killer. So yeah, they did feel slightly different, but different enough. And the villains felt quite differently. Like they required different strategies to tackle them. I appreciated that.
Yeah.
I do have a hard time seeing how, like, with the Kickstarter, there's like 20, 30. But I'm like, it's a little hard to see how they keep the characters feeling different.
Well, Ant-Man I thought was kind of one of the cooler ones because he has this ability to quantum leap. You can swap a card out, so you could replay something that was really good. And he has this cool one where he grows, where he moves. He can basically essentially double move and then do 3 strikes, which is really powerful to either knock out a villain or knock out one of his henchmen or any of these little thugs or whatever. And we should say that too, that like these little things that are out on the board, you know, like each of the villains will have, you know, their own deck of cards, which will have them do different things. I mean, they're essentially very similar, but it is cool that it has its own thing, so it meshes with what they do. But also, they also have their own threats, which are the things that you kind of put out, you know, which they are
say how this
flavorful.
works. It's actually quite clever. Like, you put out these random threats on each location.
Well, you have the same threats, but they're randomly placed.
Right. But each villain has its own different kinds of threats. And the threats are things that hurt you, but once you take care of it, you then make available the thing that helps you. So you're trying to figure out, like, should we attack this so that we could get the benefit from that? And that I really appreciate it.
Yeah,
and it just gives a different flavor because each villain has different threats. It's one more place where they can make the...
I did want to point out... Sorry, we finished with that. Go ahead, finish with that.
I was just going to say, I mean, it's yet another... They found several places to make the villains feel different. There's general rules for how they behave. Then there's the threat deck, which changes for them. And then there's this third thing about their henchmen and how they activate. So those 3 different things do make the villains feel very different, which is key.
I did want to mention that, like, it's kind of cool too. They give Red Skull this little marker that looks like the cosmic cube, and you put it on his track, and kind of you can move it up. And Red Skull, like, this is how, like, he really feels like different because he has like other characters with him, like Madam Hydra, Crossbones, you know, and he has like these things about brainwashing and stuff. So he's like, I really like that he has like, and Ultron will have drones that you can fight that'll be on the board and stuff. So it kind of makes it definitely makes them feel more like that or whatever.
Now, I will say, talking about theme, like, I never really felt like we were fighting those henchmen. Like, there's different people. There's one that's like a panda bear, so I don't know what it was. One of the henchmen. But
Panda bear? You mean Crossbones? He's got like a skull on his face.
Yeah, that's who it is. But
Crossbones.
But
Panda bear.
For me, I would say that's a good thing. Like, the fact that it's not trying to make a story and sacrificing gameplay. The gameplay is simple, but it's very clean. It's quite elegant, and it presents strategic choices to make, and they're not sacrificing that for story. It's not hugely random and this person does this weird thing. Like,
so I think So I think that like kind of segues nicely into the decision space of the game, right? So there's something that I always say, or that's kind of my mantra of like, is the game length, you know, it's like this computation of like, is the game length, and then plug in like the decisions or what, you know, and the setup and everything, and like,
and how heavy the rules are, and
all that,
upkeep, and the fidgetiness.
This game is 20 to 30 minutes, maybe
30 minutes.
So it's very quick to play, and I kind of feel like there's quite a bit of choices, right?
Quick to play, quick to set up,
and
some good choices, and the pacing is good. Pacing is good.
Yeah, so there is a natural. We don't really talk about arc that much anymore. I feel like when we used to talk about a lot of games privately, we would talk about the arc, but this game actually has a neat mechanism here, where when you complete one of these goals, the villain acts more often. So every 3 turns, he'll go. So he'll go, we'll go, I'll go again, and then he'll go, and then we'll do the same thing, right? Or the opposite. But then he's going every time we go, then he's going once you get rid of one of these. And once you get rid of the second one, then you can hit him. So there's firstly the decision point regarding these items, right, where you have to complete 2 of them before you can hit him and killing, and when you're damaging me, that's how you win the game. So you're thinking, which of these 3 goals do we want to go for with this villain? So do you want to talk about Ultron, how we decided about?
Yeah, I think Ultron was the one where as you point out, the first one hurts you, and then the second one starts to help you. So we were trying to get the timing right so that we did these both at the same time, so that we could do this decisive strike and kill him, and not leave him too much time to act where it's just hurting us with one of these guys.
So that was one thing that we did when we fought the Red Skull. So that was more like a good little gamey thing that maybe you can use in your game, which is like, don't complete one and then work on the next one. You got to get 2 goals close. But what I was kind of referring to is that the decision space of like, well, okay, we're fighting Ultron, and one of his win conditions is just to put out his drones everywhere, or the thugs, right, and fill up the whole thing, and then he wins. So if there's no empty space, he wins. And so because of that, we decided, well, we're gonna spend most of the game clearing those spaces so we won't win, and so we went towards these 2 goals.
Yeah.
And so you can kind of decide, and so with our first game with Red Skull, we decided, well, we want to be able to use the special powers of the locations, and so we decided we're going to clear the threats first, right? And so I guess that's one big area of deciding which one to use. And then this is another area, right? Like,
that's right.
Like you can decide to fight these, or do this, and then of course, well, do you want to clear one of these because it's hurtful, or do you want to clear one of these because you want that benefit of the location, right?
Yes, I mean you're on the core part of what I think I found enjoyable about this game. Sort of the actual actions you take on each turn are very quick, they're all deterministic. There's no rolling dice to see what happens, and they're very mechanical. But there's some deep decisions that are long-term planning strategy decisions about exactly like which of these 2 goals should we go for, which of these threats should we get rid of, as you said, to help us, but also to unlock these things, which also gives it this nice ramping of power thing, right? Because as you get rid of these, you have new powers that come out, and they're clever powers. They're all end of turn, which adds this little dimension of like, I have to now end my turn on this to trigger it. Like in the last fight we had to win by like utilizing the power of this place and hang out there, and it makes the game feel different in the beginning. And in the end, in the beginning, you're like trying to keep stuff tamped down, and then you've got this timing decision. When do you go for this strike? And you're trying to time it all perfectly, like unlock these things, and then some bad things are going to happen.
Yeah, we've only played this game 3 times. We just played one of each of the villains or whatever, and we, the first game we decided, we're going to knock these 2 out at the same exact time, so that Red Skull wouldn't go again, and then we fought him, and then. Although we did 2 different ones, sorry. And then with Ultron, we just filled these up because we were trying to, not let him get powered up, right? But there's something here regarding this that Jesse's always talking about, which you always like to think of the idea of like when you complete some goal or you finish something in a game, and it's just like, okay, well, that's not hurting us anymore. And it's like, well, great. But you always like the idea of getting that reward, right? Yeah. And I think in this game, it's sort of like you finish one of these, and you have that a new option, a new reward, which is a really kind of a cool little thing.
Very clever. It also helps it from being overwhelming. You don't start out with these millions of different abilities. You're unlocking them one at a time. Yeah. And there's a million of these little efficiency things in there. Like, you're like, well, we don't want these to fill up because then a bad thing can happen when they're filled up. So you're incentivized to keep these things from filling up. But it's hard to move around. So if you're near something, you're like, well, maybe I should focus on this because I'm near it. And then the teamwork part is quite clever. It's quite clever and simple and elegant. We talk about elegance a lot. But whatever I play a card, and now Greg has that symbol available to him. So you're like planning a couple moves ahead.
So you have to. So like a lot of times I'll be like, okay, well, you want to play that now, that's great because it's going to help you, but like, is that symbol going to help me? You know, you know what I mean? Like, it's kind of a cool thing where it's like, and I think if you played more players, like somebody like Captain America, where you can give a token to another hero, it would be more like, okay, well, I'm going to give this to you so that he sets you up for this other move or whatever. And that's pretty neat, you know? So it's got a lot of, these like sort of, we're describing this like you have all these options, but essentially on your turn, you only have a few cards and you don't have essentially a lot of options.
That's true.
But you do have, like, it's not overwhelming and it's not so complicated. You have what you have is a nice mix of like stuff to think about and to talk about. Like, should we do this? No, we should do this. But it's quick. You're like, okay, well, I'll play this. Well, I don't have that move, so I'm just going to do this. That's the better move, right? Like, you're kind of very constrained.
Yeah, and the actual, on your turn, you, as you point out, you do very little.
Yeah.
And frequently, it's not like we didn't have heavy debates about what to do stuff, but there were lots of little things like, can we tweak a little bit more efficiency out of it? Like, it's clear I should hit this person, and you're slowly inching yourself towards certain goals, right? So... But the actual decisions on every turn, I mean, this hit the spot of what they were aiming for in terms of sort of mass market, because you're not overwhelmed with your decisions.
So there's a pretty, I guess, fairly common, maybe a little more uncommon, like mechanism where people will like, you'll roll some action dice and it'll say like, okay, well, I can take, like, War of the Ring has it, Takenoko has it, where like you sort of roll a dice and it's sort of like these are the couple of actions that we can use, you know. And so it just kind of narrows your focus a little bit and makes you deal with what you have, you know, make the best of options you've got that turn, which in some games I feel I don't like it because it's too constraining or random, I feel. But in like this game, it's so light and quick, honestly, like, that it keeps that rolling along.
Yeah, you always point out the length of the game, but in a game like this, I feel like we got pretty lucky in some cases, but because it's such a short game, if you got very unlucky and you lost and things went bad, you'd just be like, oh, let's play it again. It's no big deal.
Yeah, and so one other thing I want to talk about the teamwork is like, really few games have a teamwork aspect. I think this game does it well, very simply, of course. And so it does it well where, like, you kind of, like I said, you kind of feel like, oh, well, Iron Man must have picked this person up, or Captain Marvel must have picked this person up and carried them over there. Or, like, you know, Cap is, like, inspiring this person, gave him the token and helped them, you know, used his shield to bump somebody up so they ran and jumped up the shield or whatever. And so, like, you can kind of, like, imagine that or make a story about it, what's happening. But, you know, the only other game that really I remember, like, I've never played Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I'm not really a fan of that franchise. I watched it when I was a kid, of course. But, like, you know, that game had something where you could sort of team up. You each play a card or something, and there were team up actions, which is a really compelling part of a design. So,
yeah, but I think that's there's an interesting point to be made here. It's rare that a game that's trying to encourage working together doesn't have special irritating rules for how to do things together. Like, if you're both in the same space, then you can combine this. Like, this is so elegant. Like, you're always using your card ability and the previous card ability. There's no special rule if you want to work together. There's no special thing that happens if you're in the same space. And that really makes it nice. And it's also, it does present lots of opportunities where you're like, this is what I want to do. But let's just look ahead one turn and look ahead to your turn. Can you make use of that symbol? And if you can't, maybe I should do something that's slightly suboptimal for me. And because they chain, right, like the next person's thing is for you, and it just continues in that way, you're always cooperating. Every action you make is affecting the next player's turn. Yeah. Every action. It's not you're occasionally meeting up to work together. Yeah. Every action, what you do is what choices are available to your partner. And that means it's constant cooperation.
You could almost see, like, okay, so a lot of times games have like a, like it's Power Grid the card game, or, Pandemic the dice game or whatever, where they simplify a game. But you don't really ever see that go the other way around, you know? I mean,
this is an interesting point.
I just thought of it now, and I'm like, how cool would that be if they went the other way and they said, okay, well, now we're going to take this and we're going to do a more advanced version of this.
Because there's some very clever stuff going on here, but it's still a light game. Yeah. And it's a really interesting thing to say. There's so many interesting things here. let's see a heavy version of this.
Yeah,
that is a great
really cool.
idea.
So, but I want to touch on something else that's also kind of an interesting concept that you wouldn't normally see in like a mass market or a lighter game like this. And that's the idea of like that you see a lot in like living card games and stuff where you're actually, you can tech. So when we played, you can watch on the channel here, we played against Taskmaster. And, you know, I thought we are not going to beat him. He's really hard.
Yeah,
it
looked bad.
But I thought to myself, you know, the Hulk would be especially strong against Taskmaster, and I thought, oh well, I said to Justin, like, we're not going to win this. We'll have to try again. And I said we should pick which character we're going to take, and I think the Hulk would be very effective. And so that idea of like of being able to tech against a villain in the lightest possible way. You know, you're not like building a deck from different deck construction, and you're going to take it against your newest Arkham Horror scenario or whatever. This is just like, hey, I think this character would be really good versus this villain. Let's pick him. So that's just a nice extra little thing, you know. I mean, I can't believe we're talking so much about this because it's so streamlined and simple, but it really does have a lot of really. I mean,
well, I do think. Yeah,
I
do think we're going to get to some negative thoughts about this game soon, but it's. One other thing that one other point about the elegance of this game, like the difficulty levels. You can make it harder. How do you make it harder? There's no extra rules. You just remove this one card, nice card from your hand, which also reduces the time clock. I didn't even think of.
So I was going to bring that up next.
How elegant is that?
So essentially, it just has a card. Sorry, I should put it down. So it just has a card that for each of these things, right? So it has moderate, hard, and heroic. So you would remove one of your cards, right?
Which is a wild card.
Which is the
quite
wild
a strong
tokens,
card.
right? So you just would pull out one of these, or the one that just has one, or the one that has two, and this one you remove both. So you remove, but it's neat because it just has this card in there to make it super easy. So you're like, oh, I just do that. But Jesse's also pointed out that like, your deck is a hard clock that the game is going on. And when we were fighting against Taskmaster last, like it was like, we are going to run out of time. And we didn't feel that way with the other villains, but this was like, we got to rush. And, when we were playing against it, but this is like an extra card kind of speeding up the clock and taking this out. But it's just a very, cute little elegant way to do it.
And it works. That would adjust the difficulty quite a bit.
So that was a nice little thing, quick and easy thing to do. Now, I do want to talk about the idea of this game, like, we should probably just talk about this in the recommendation thing, but this does seem light enough to like non-gamers and family, like younger family, like if your kids were big, you take your kids to see the newest Marvel movie and then you guys all play Marvel United. I mean, that seems like and also non-gamers or people, this could be considered, do you think it could be considered a gateway game?
Absolutely.
So I do want to talk about,
and just to add on that, there are games that you could play this with kids that didn't grasp everything or weren't doing long-term planning, but they've got 3 cards in front of them. They can take their actions, and you could, if you were better and doing more strategy, you'd be responsible for that part, and they'd be saying, okay, I'm playing this, now I can move and attack. Like, they would fully grasp their job and role and would love it.
Yeah.
They'd love to fight these things and save civilians.
So you can also, but you can see, you'd be like, it would be kind of cool, like, if you were like a dad or a mom and you want to play like Captain America, and you could like, you're like leading your family and you kind of give them a little token or whatever. And then you're like, are you sure you want to do that, honey? You're like, you're going to help your brother? He's going to go right after you. Okay, maybe I'll play this. You can kind of see that it helps to foster. And it's a positive thing. You're all working together against a villain or whatever, right? So.
And again, it's short. You lose. It's fine.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about Jesse, do you think this is we talk about consumable games in the market and stuff. Jesse and I happen to like consumable games. I like going through Legacy Game and being like, done. I played that enough. It was fun. Now it's done, right? Campaign games, etc. So do you think that this game is consumable?
Well, for
in
me,
the box.
Yeah, for me, yes. I tend to, there's certain games that for me, after I play them and beat them on a certain villain with a certain heroes, like I'm happy to play every villain and really enjoy it. And every hero, and maybe some combinations. But once I've beaten the one villain with the one hero, I don't have any desire to play it again.
Yeah, I would agree with you there. I mean, like, despite the choices and the nice little ramping of the difficulty and the arc of the game or whatever, I'm not, like this feels like a consumable product to me.
It's not deep enough.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to play these characters, and I'm going to be like, that was cool. I'm probably done. And the thing is, it's such a light price point. I mean, we've essentially got an hour and a half out of this game at this moment, right? And $30 or whatever, right? So that's maybe a little pricey, right? So, but like it does feel in that way like it's consumable. Like the characters, have it's like they have this cool little power, but once you kind of go through and use that, you're like, okay, that was cool to try that character and see what they could do. But it's not like playing like a game with that depth where you would
That's
like
right.
want to
It doesn't have that depth. But there are two asterisks that you might put there. First is if there are going to be lots of expansions, then you're talking about a continual feed of new interesting. Like I would absolutely, if you sent me an email, though you don't email, but if you sent me a text message and you said, hey, I just got this new villain, I'd be like, let's go, let's play this new villain, let's try it.
Great.
The other thing is, you could absolutely, you said gateway game, this is absolutely like a co-op gateway game that you might keep, and then if you had friends over that were like, well, we're not real gamers, but we love Marvel, we love comic books, like bang. You're not going to bring Sentinels of the Multiverse out, right?
Neither of us like that game anyway.
Right, but I mean, you could just put on the table, teach it in a couple minutes, and they'd completely understand how to play, and it would be fun teamwork. Yeah. So let's could have this even not just for friends, not for, after you've finished it.
So talking about the characters and stuff, let's segue into our kind of Kickstarter discussion.
Okay.
Now
we're going to do a separate Kickstarter
Sure, but this
review.
Okay, so to paraphrase or to kind of that is. Let me explain. That's too much. I sum up. That's from Princess Bride. Boop. So they had a Kickstarter for this, and Cool Mini or Not is that makes this game. They team up with Spin Master for it, right? So, and essentially, like Cool Mini or Not has done so many Kickstarters. They make millions of dollars every time they do. When they do like 4 a year or something, and they make a couple $1 million every time they do it or whatever, right? And that's aside from what they sell off the shelves at game shops or Barnes & Noble or whatever, right? So they have figured it out.
Yeah, they've got the algorithms down.
I mean, it's crazy. So what they've done with their Kickstarter is that they've given you a ton of Kickstarter exclusive figures that are extra. Yeah. Okay, so you get the deck. You have a deck for Ant-Man. You have this. So like, if this was the Wasp, you'd have Wasp in that, and you're going to get that with your Kickstarter along with probably 20 or more extra people, as well as extra villains, which have their deck, dashboard, villain sculpt, etc. And so there's a huge amount of content that is not available at the retail level, and that once the Kickstarter is gone, you can't get. We're going to put a pin in that.
Yeah.
So I did like a Dr. Evil. I'm like, zip it. So that's going on, right? And then, but on top of that, now this is where Cool Mini has really like sort of twisted the knife, and this is very insidious, I think. And what they've done is they've said, okay, well, there's whole expansions that you cannot get. So if we were talking about the consumable nature, and if you thought like, oh, well, I'll get a new other expansion. There's a Thanos one. It has Thanos and it has the Black Order, the 4 members of the Black Order, and it has like an Infinity Gauntlet. I'll buy that, and we'll have 4 new villains to fight. Cool. Well, actually, that expansion, that entire expansion, those 4 characters, that whole box is Kickstarter exclusive. Yeah. And out of for this game, not to go into Expand United yet, but there's like 5 expansions through the Kickstarter that you can buy. And I think like 3 of them are or maybe it's like more than, I don't know, but roughly like 3 of them are Kickstarter exclusive only. Right. So that's a significant chunk of content.
But this is their second Kickstarter. So every time there's a Kickstarter, you'll have a chance to buy them again. But
that's Jesse's footnote. Yeah. So right at this moment, if you're watching this as it airs, probably aren't, because we don't have very many viewers right now. Womp womp. But like you have the ability with the X-Men United, right? Kickstarter active live right now. You could buy this older content.
That's right. The previous Kickstarter content.
Hundreds of dollars, to do this.
So yeah, I mean, we're gonna have a separate video on the Kickstarter, but the other thing I want to point out is that this base set you get a lot for a little bit of money. Everything else is you're paying the same $30 for half the content, quarter of the content. So which is part of the Kickstarter algorithm they figured out that they can give you the base cheap, and then they're going to charge you $40 shipping and $40 for one miniature. But if you love miniatures, you could, if you bought everything,
toy collector, that's
you could get like, well, how many minis if you bought everything? It's like 50 or so.
Something. It's crazy. It's huge. It's a large amount,
and they're nice looking minis.
So do you think, because do you agree that it's a consumable product? Well, Jesse,
For
do you think
us, if you had young kids, it's possible they would play this over and over and over again.
Oh, they absolutely would. If I was a kid, I'd play this. Like, it doesn't matter.
But for us, if you're sort of on the heavier end of it, it is consumable.
So, do you think it's worthwhile to like play through the thing and like if you weren't going to buy any more content?
If you weren't going to buy more content, I still think for us, $30 if we got 4 plays out of it, 5 plays.
So I think one of the and don't quote me on this, but I think there's like a spider villain one that has all villains, and there's like 5 new villains. And I would think that like maybe that would be something that would breathe new life, because fighting different villains would add a lot more to the game or whatever.
Absolutely.
So it's in getting like the X-Men version coming out. Like I'm like, oh, I'd love to play, because I love the X-Men. It'd be cool to play that version with with additional villains and additional heroes and see how those match up. And then you could mix the two and play some of those villains. I'm guessing it's cross-playable. I could imagine.
Yeah, you made me think of something. There's a couple issues when it comes to playing with expansions, and it's consumable, except that they're expansions that you're going to play. Some games you're like Robinson Crusoe. When you open up that expansion, you're like, oh my God, I'm exhausted. I don't want to go near this again. But this game, the rules are so clean, so elegant, and it's so fast. If we had a new villain in a box there, we'd learn it in 3 minutes and be able to play it, which means you're much more likely to play those things. And I think for me, that makes this much more likely.
Fair, one game of like Robinson Crusoe would be equal to like playing all the villains in this box.
I know, but you know what I mean. There are games where the expansions, like Arkham Horror 3rd Edition, the expansion is like a whole big ordeal, and often you're like,
you spend more time setting it up than you would playing through the whole box.
If you saw it on the shelf, you'd be like, if we went into a game store, you could absolutely see us in a game store playing our normal game, Sleeping God, Seventh Continent, and then getting up to stretch, looking around, and we see a new villain back. You'd be like, let's just play it. Let's get it. Let's play it. Get it and play it and have fun. So I think it's very likely. Don't you think that we'll be playing more villains, more of this?
I would absolutely buy an expansion and play it. It does rub me a little raw that they put so much of the content is only available via Kickstarter, or you're gonna have to pay a lot of a healthy premium to buy aftermarket or whatever. So that's a whole other conversation. But I think like, that's a whole Kickstarter. This is just very interesting, like the way the whole business model works.
It's aggravating, it's frustrating, and you feel like you're being extorted.
But it's crazy to see how that industry is going, and I think this game to me, and maybe I'm wrong, but this game to me feels like some milestone or turning point. Because I think Cool Mini or Not I can't imagine any other company has made more money on Kickstarter board game wise than Cool Mini or Not. And so you could say that they're a trendsetter. I mean, if I was this company, I'd be like, I'm doing this. Okay, I want to see what Cool Mini is doing, because they're obviously successful. And because of that, it's going to set a trend. And you're going to probably see other businesses, like other companies, realizing that that's a good way to make a more...
That's an interesting point. I mean, we should wrap up the Kickstarter stuff, but I don't feel like they're breaking ground with the Kickstarter, but I know they went into this game, like Eric Lang, who's one of the primary developers, who I'm not a huge fan of, but I know he presented this as their attempt to sort of make a mass market accessible game that was still a good game. And I think, to be fair, they hit it out of the park. They got it absolutely right. It's refined, polished, elegant, simple, but still deep enough. And this is like a cash cow. They did figure out they could sell. They could.
Well, I mean, Marvel. I'm sure Marvel is taking a huge chunk out of it. But it is interesting to kind of see this theme really creeping into new games. Like, I mean, there was HeroClix, which I'm not really fond of. But other than that, there was occasionally you'd see a game with Marvel heroes and stuff in it. And even when the MCU was going on for a number of years, I was surprised you really didn't see a lot of it. But now you're seeing a lot of Marvel games.
I got a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you think this would play with more than 2 players?
Just
sometimes
fine.
I know, sometimes I'm not sure.
I think like being able to, like some of these where you give the other tokens to people, I think that's kind of cool. I mean, I think like it's so light.
You're always only teaming up with the person before you and then the person after you. So you're still not having to worry about like a million different permutations. I like that.
I also think that like sitting on a location, is probably like good for certain things, like certain locations have, like, this is like you may rescue somebody from this location, so it's probably more likely that you'll see that.
Now, how does it, when it scales for multiple players, it doesn't scale. It's just that this comes out every 2 or 3. Like,
right,
that
so
doesn't
that
change.
scales, it's the same, but the villain does have more health.
That's right, but
it's not an extensive amount. So yeah, I mean, it is a very clean design. You can tell that, like, someone with a lot of board game background and skill had designed this game.
Absolutely, and it was played
because it really, I mean, like anything else mass market like that, I would really feel like, and especially geared towards family or kids, I would say, which has a healthy amount of that, managed to hold our attention and kind of
this is a real win. This is a good design.
Yeah. So we've kind of talked about ways to improve it, which would be to make it like a sort of a meatier version of that.
That's so good, with maybe a more interesting spatial element. And
so what about comparisons to other games? Like,
well, I do. The one that jumps out at me really is not a game that shares that much mechanically, but clearly is in the same channel, which is Wonder Woman, which we played, which does feel like it was also aimed at a mass market stuff. And the difference, the price point, the difference in the price point, that's right. But boy, the difference in success between the two games. This is like how you do it right, and Wonder Woman, especially in comparison, looks pretty bad compared to this. The teamwork stuff is terrible.
Yeah, they try to kind of avoid the alpha player, and it's hard to like
the different.
I did like it, by the way.
The villains having different feels. They do change the rules, but it's not as good. The pacing is terrible. The ramping up is non-existent. Yeah. Like everything, the minis, it just cannot compare.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I enjoyed that game, playing it, but I mean, like, if they both had the same target, they made it. They hit the mark here. And I mean, I'm a little biased because I enjoy this IP more, but it's really not about that. It's like if they're trying to do because I think they were aiming for that same market and stuff, but I think that it's like it's a much less elegant design, to say the least.
It's much less elegant.
It's clunkier. It's not as,
and as a framework, it's not modular in the way this is, right? It's a fixed board. There are fixed locations. It's a world that you can't change. Like, it does not compare. Yeah. Like if you have kids, this is the game you have to get, not Wonder Woman.
Or non-gamers, I think, for sure. Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, and you had kind of asked me to like mention Marvel Champions. I mean, this is like nowhere even close to the complexity of Marvel Champions.
Or the depth of
the depth of that game and interesting choices. But I mean, like, you know, that's a very accessible game, honestly, because you can buy a deck and just play that hero or whatever. So that's kind of a nice thing about that. And of course, there's Marvel Crisis Protocol, which involves modeling and gluing things and everything. So that's like completely
but Marvel Champions has the same idea of you're picking a villain, it's having different helpers, you're playing a deck which is your hero with special abilities. So I mean, it's got some of that flavor.
I guess I would say, like, if this was a gateway game for you and you're like, I want to go further, then Marvel Champions would be a fantastic.
Here's my question for you: when you play Marvel Champions compared to this, do you feel like the villains and the heroes are more fleshed out, like you're actually having special abilities that are more different than the other heroes?
It's more complicated, so then it's the answer is a resounding yes, but just because it's more, it's a more robust game, right? So yeah, I mean, I think that this it's kind of almost a little bit unique in that. Like, I was kind of thinking what other games I would recommend, but I would say as a next step, I would try like something like Marvel Champions, the card game, something like that. But I think it's kind of fits in a nice little niche of like being like simple, fast, but fun.
That fast thing is so true. Yeah. I mean, you are such a big proponent about this, but boy, this is an example of a game that's so well paced and so fast that it's almost everything else can be forgiven. Yeah. Like, all the rough edges, there aren't really rough edges in this game, but when a game is that fast and clean and...
Yeah, I do want to mention one other thing though, is that, like, I'm not a big fan of those pops or whatever, but like I think it's worth $30 if you just like to collect Marvel stuff and you wanted to like have these figures. And I will say this too, actually, which is a really cool thing. If you want to get your kids into painting minis, or you want to paint minis, I mean,
they're big,
and they're easy to paint. I mean, the detail on them, on the smaller, regular like 28 millimeter minis, is a lot harder to deal with. But these are so much easier. You'd feel so much better about painting these, and it would be a good like jump. And
it's not overwhelming. There aren't 100 zombicide things to paint.
Yeah, and like I said, I mean, it would be very forgiving for making errors or whatever. And so, but just as a toy collector, I think they're kind of cool. And not to say anything about the Kickstarter, but like I'm like, the newest for X-Men is out there for $65, and you probably get 50 figures. It's almost worth it just for that alone, just to get, if you're kind of a collector of those type of things. But I think we should wrap it up with our ratings here.
Yeah.
Do you have a rating, or do you want to kind of sum up?
I do have a rating. It's interesting when we start these reviews. It's almost like you can't tell how positive we're going to be. I feel the same way with Endangered. As we started getting rolling, we were starting to lavish praise. I will say this before I give my rating. We played 3 games of this. The first 2 I was very lukewarm on. I was like, it's interesting, but I'm not. It's not doing any. It's not blowing my socks off. Whatever. The last game required us to hit everything right and make these very efficient moves and get the timing exactly right. And I love the timing decisions in this game. So it was that last game that did it for me. The first 2 games. So I do think this game is going to wear out its welcome without more content. So that's the biggest hit over this. For me personally, maybe a 7. But I would be pushing this on. If I saw a family in the board game store, I'd be like, great game. Get this game, amazing. And I really do want to try expansions. With expansions, this could go up for me. But just because it's not as heavy, it's not as satisfying for me. There aren't stories for us to tell about winning and losing. It's too short for that. But I would gladly play this any day. In a game store, if you were like, I want to try this, I want to play this again, I'd be thrilled to play it.
Yeah. So I think thematically, it has a really nice thematic feel. If you like Marvel, it's right there. I do. The minis look fantastic, although they have that cartoony style. I think that it's a very quick game to play. It offers interesting choices while I'm doing it. It is consumable, however. For us, as a modern gamer, like I don't need to play this a bunch, so it's going to require additional content, although it is inexpensive. So I think for what it's going for and what it is, I would also rate it a 7, actually.
Interesting.
Yeah, because I love having games where I can just play them quickly, and try different things, and that's good for me. And I think if the price point, go ahead and give me some of these boards that are maybe a little warped or whatever, fine, because I'm not going to play it a million times, but I think it's worth going through them. I think, getting an expansion that had 4 more villains or something, would be kind of cool. It'd be cool to get an expansion that had 3 and 3 or something like that, although they'll be as much as the base game, but really that's fine because I'm going to get as much play out of it as I would for this.
And this would be such an easy recommendation to someone with kids who likes superheroes and comics. I can see this easy. Yeah, if I had
high
marks for that.
Nieces or nephews that would play something like this, I'd be like, I'm bringing this for the holidays or whatever, like for Thanksgiving, and I'm going to play with the the younger kids or whatever. I mean, I could play anywhere. This is something like a lot of times like for my my cousin's kids, I would I could bring something to play with them, but then my other cousin's kids, if they were there's one that was much younger, and so I'm like, you can't really play this kind of game. So, but this, I think they could, they totally could. So it really accommodates those at their ages. But I think we've probably said
2 7s, which is a little misleading in terms, because I think we both think much more highly of it than that 7 might suggest.
Yeah. But I mean, it's not, it's for what I think it's for what it is.
And for us.
Yeah, and for us, yeah. So, I mean, and that's still a really good rating, I think,
Yeah, I'll play more of it. Yeah. I'd absolutely play more of it.
But we're probably not going to play more of this in the box. But you can watch us play it on the channel.
And maybe we're going to go all in on the Kickstarter and dump a load of cash and have $1 million.
So if you're more timely, I think we are going to look at the X-Men Kickstarter. So
there'll be more Kickstarters, even if you miss this one. There'll be one in 2022. Yeah. This game's not going away. All right.
Yeah, let's
if you like these videos, please consider subscribing, clicking on notifications, maybe even becoming a Patreon supporter.
One more question. I was going to say 2 more questions, but we already answered one of them. What's your favorite hero to play? What's your favorite hero and what's your favorite villain to play against?
I liked Miss Marvel on this one. Her ability to attack neighboring places was good.
Yeah, I like Ant-Man best, but I didn't really get to play his full thing. So maybe that would be a good way to. I liked how he kind of could move around and do the quantum realm thing. Yeah. So thanks for joining us.
And we'll see you on the next video.
Ready?
You're right over the line. Okay.
It's like you just you can't put even that.
Just
put that
let me
out.
get settled.